Guys, and welcome to another video. Today I am reviewing Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell by Susanna Clarke, and as I've just clicked on to see what the blurb says, I see #1. I didn't realise there was another one to this world. Some of you probably already know this, most of you probably already know this, but there is a prequel by the looks of things called The Ladies of Grace Adieu and Other Stories. So a short story collection, and this came out in 2006, so I don't know why I didn't know that this existed. Interesting, like literally 2 years after the release of Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell. So interesting. Let me know if you've read that, because I didn't even know it existed until I just sat down now to film this. So I thought I'd give you a synopsis because it's definitely going to explain it far better than I am. So anyway, a couple of months ago, or was it last month? It must have been last month. I finally decided to bite the bullet and read this behemoth of the book, and this is the synopsis. The year is 1806. England is beleaguered, I don't know if that's the word, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly or not, by the long war with Napoleon. Centuries have passed since practical magicians faded into the nation's past, but scholars of this glorious history discover that one remains, the reclusive Mr. Norrell, whose displays of magic send a thrill through the country. Proceeding to London, he raises a beautiful woman from the dead and summons an army of ghostly ships to terrify the French. Yet the cautious, fussy Norrell is challenged by the emergence of another magician, the brilliant novice Jonathan Strange. Young, handsome and daring, Strange is the very antithesis of Norrell. So begins a dangerous battle between these two great men, which overwhelms that between England and France, and their own obsessions and secret dabblings with the dark arts are going to cause more trouble than they can imagine. So this is a big book. It's just over 1,000 pages long, and it was originally published in September 2004. So originally I didn't really have many much desire to pick this one up, because one, I didn't really know what it was about. Two, I thought it was massive, and because I didn't know what it was about, I didn't know it was about magicians and magic and things of that nature, it just looked too big, and I thought, nah, I don't even want to try and get into that. And three, after reading Piranesi by the author a couple of years prior and not really being that wowed by it, it was just okay to me, I thought, I'm not really that intrigued to pick up anything else by her. And as I only knew that this was the only other book that she had brought out, and it being so large, I thought, well, I'm definitely not going to put myself through that if I didn't enjoy the shorter book that she brought out. But my friend absolutely adores this book, absolutely adores this story, the novel, the writing and everything, and he's been trying to get me to read it for so long. So much so that when I last went up to visit them, he gave me his copy to read, but his version was so like it was the red cover. I don't know if you guys have seen it. Red cover, white font, I believe, but the pages are like Bible thin pages. The font is tiny, and I just knew I wouldn't read that. But once I got more enthused about it, after he was telling me more about it, what it sort of focused on, that sort of vibe, and I was getting more into seeking out Victorian era setting novels, particularly with magic in them, I thought, okay, I'm passionate enough now to want to give this a go. So I decided to do some blended reading through audiobook and ebook, because there's some pictures in there, and it's nice to have, like with a big book like this, if you're going to do audio, it's nice to kind of read alongside it, I find personally, because it helps the story to sink in better. So that's my little preamble about why it took me so long to get to this one. Let's get into the actual review. I think the way that I listened to it and read it together was the ultimate combination for me. As I mentioned previously, it just helped me to soak in those words a bit more and really feel more immersed in the story. It was such a thorough and detailed novel, which leads itself in the same breath to, you know, come across as quite dense, and that was one of my original fears of why I sort of gravitated away from it originally. But it was very interesting despite this, and it was full of this rich and crisp storytelling and world building and character analysis that I just couldn't get enough of. I think due to the blended reading, you know, the audio and the digital reading, I was able to fully enjoy the prose of this without the worry of disassociating completely from the story. Had I felt would have been the case had I either physically read it completely or just listened to it. I needed to kind of be grounded by the two. I don't know if anyone else finds that. I don't know why I wasn't expecting such a wider cast of characters. We are in this like high society Victorian London era, so you're going to have just, you know, regular callers coming to visit. You're going to have affluent, influential people, and I just didn't realise how like intense an amount of characters we'd meet along the way. This book takes place over quite a few years, if I remember correctly, so you know that leaves you with loads of people to meet. And I think it just threw me off originally because I thought it was solely going to be about Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell, but that would have been probably rather dull, just to focus on them two. So I am glad that we had this wider ensemble of characters, which really added a wider depth and narration to the plot and gave, you know, varying perspectives on the topic of magic and magicians in London, you know, their place in society, and if they can be used in the war, because war is such a massive theme in this book. You know, they mentioned Napoleon in the synopsis. It's kind of this building, what can they use to kind of one up the French, and yeah, other finer nuances was just added to it by having more characters to follow along. Now don't get me wrong, it was still overwhelming to have such a wide cast of characters, but most of them were side characters, and you know, they added what they needed to the story, and then you can kind of just carry on with your day. You didn't need to necessarily keep them completely in your mind, but I still did have some struggles remembering more of the characters that cropped up more frequently, you know, and I think I talk about that a little bit later in this review. I love how smoothly the narrator transitioned from text to the footnotes. I think that worked perfectly. Again, something I probably would have struggled with personally had I just read the book physically, because I never know like how to read footnotes. I don't come across it so often in the books that I pick up, so I probably would have just ignored it until the end, or I would have got myself like confused, flickering back and forth to the bottom of the page and back up again. So I think the way that the narrator kind of smoothly transitioned between, you know, the regular storytelling and the characters and everything to the additional notes in the footnotes was just absolutely perfectly and incredibly, and you know, just added so much more to the story, something that I probably would have missed out on. Again, coming from Piranesi, physically reading that, there's footnotes in those too, and this is just something I found frustrating. I just couldn't get on board with. That could just perhaps be the case that I haven't read books like that before, but I think had I, as I previously mentioned, with such a big book as well, just solely read it, I would have probably have given up, you know. It would have most likely have had a far different outcome to a positive review that I'm giving it today. I thought the whole idea of bringing back magic to Victorian era London was so clever, and it was fabulously carried out. You can tell that Susanna Clarke has thought so much about this story, so much about this world, and has painstakingly taken the time to craft it so precisely. So I was really appreciative of that. The different characters we meet along the way to either aid or oppose or just go along for the ride with Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell's journey added such excitement and more intrigue to such a greater plot. It was never like a flat story. There was so many diversions and character analysis here and there, and tweaks there, and you know, plot twists, things that I wouldn't ever have thought about, you know. It just made it all feel so believable and so enchanting as well, and also frightening. I really enjoyed the fraught relationship that Strange and Norrell had with each other. It was almost like a parasitic or symbiotic kind of relationship. They begrudgingly needed each other in some capacity, and I found it quite interesting that we began with Mr. Norrell being this, you know, one and only wonder to London, so to speak, and then when Jonathan Strange kind of crops up, he's like, oh okay, I must now take control of the situation and have him as my like apprentice, so to speak. So that was interesting. And then they're such different characters in and of themselves, like they just butted heads from the get-go. One example is that Mr. Norrell feels like you should, you know, focus your whole life on your magic learning and, you know, the politics of the things, and that you shouldn't let love get in the way, whereas Jonathan Strange is already married and happily married for quite some time in this story when it begins, and he's like, oh, you have a wife, you have a life, like, no, you need to, this is Mr. Norrell, he's like, you need to kind of focus on the magic, and he's like, I can do both, you know. So it was interesting to see the opposing opinions that kind of really got some heated conversations and just differences acknowledged in the book. So as I mentioned briefly earlier, there still were some times where I couldn't remember characters' names or follow the thread of their stories, just because there was so much going on, and I did find it to be generally overwhelming, although it was such a well crafted world. So yeah, despite being interested in these particular characters' narratives, I really struggled to keep up with the plot involving Mr. Drawlight and with Stephen. I think it's because at this point I was finding so many new like little plots and was interested by all of them, that in the end it was just sort of inevitable for some to get crossed over and confused in my mind, especially when everything and everyone was sort of interlinked in some way. I just got things twisted around in my head, and I think that would sort of be resolved had I watched the TV show. If I get a chance to watch the TV show, seeing it visually would probably clear things up. So I think that's just, you know, the crossover of literature and a big cast of characters. It's gonna happen. I don't have the mental capacity to keep everyone clear in my mind, especially when I don't have physical quirks and attributes to visually remember to be like, ah, yes, I remember that person, that's what they do, you know what I mean? Like, it's just, it gets a little bit twisted after a while, which I think is understandable. So overall, I thought this was an enchanting and logical exploration of magic in an era of time that I really need to explore more. And since then, I have picked up, I believe, a few other books that are set in kind of Victorian-esque, alternative Victorian eras. So yeah, I thought this was a fantastic beast of a book. I'm really looking forward to checking out the TV show at some point. I did go on BBC iPlayer because I'm pretty sure it aired on BBC at one point. I'm pretty sure it was their production, but it's not on there anymore. But my friend has told me that it's now on BritBox, which is like an app. It's like, not like an app, well yeah, a TV app. It's like a subscription service with all like British dramas and stuff on there. So I might get like a free trial just to watch that, and I'm sure I'll report back when I eventually watch that in one of my TV show wrap-ups. But yeah, that's it. I gave it a 5 out of 5 stars, if I didn't already mention, and I absolutely loved it. I'm kicking myself that I didn't get to it much sooner, but I think all the reasons why I didn't kind of made sense for me at the time. So yeah, I'm looking forward to potentially going back and reading that prequel as well. So let me know if you've read the prequel and this book, Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell. And also, if you have read the prequel, did you read it before picking up this one? Like, did you read it after they were both published and you just went for the prequel first? I'd love to know, and if that's kind of changed your overall opinion. But yes, that is it for this video. Thank you ever so much for watching, and I shall catch you in another one soon. Bye!